When a janitor's mop becomes a weapon and a CEO's boardroom turns into a battlefield, some secrets refuse to stay buried. Tonight, one man's promise to his dying wife will shatter against the screams of a woman who holds the power to destroy him or save him. Will you stay until the end to discover how love can bloom in the ashes of betrayal? Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Shaw Industries' underground parking garage hummed their mechanical lullaby, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars that stood like silent sentinels in the corporate tomb. At 11:47 p.m., the garage should have been empty save for the scattered luxury vehicles of workaholics too obsessed with quarterly reports to remember what home felt like. Ethan Cole pushed his janitor's cart between the gleaming sedans and SUVs, the wheels squeaking in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his invisible existence. Gray uniform, gray cart, gray life. He'd perfected the art of being nobody, and tonight was supposed to be just another shift in his carefully constructed anonymity. But the universe had other plans. The first scream shattered the silence like glass against stone, echoing off the concrete walls with a desperate urgency that made Ethan's blood freeze in his veins. He'd heard that sound before in darker places during bloodier times when he wore different clothes and answered to a different name. "Please, someone help me." The voice belonged to a woman, and it was getting closer. Ethan abandoned his cart muscle memory from a life he'd buried taking over as he moved toward the sound with the fluid grace of a predator. His work boots made no sound against the polished floor. Some skills once learned never truly died. Around the corner near the executive elevator bank, chaos unfolded like a nightmare in 3 acts. Isabella Voss, CEO of Shaw Industries, and one of the most powerful women in the city, was fighting for her life against 3 men in black tactical gear. Her Hermes heels had been kicked off in the struggle, her perfectly styled blonde hair now wild and tangled, but her emerald eyes blazed with the fury of a cornered lioness. "Get your hands off me!" she snarled, driving her elbow into one attacker's ribs with enough force to make him grunt. But they were professionals. The lead attacker, built like a linebacker with dead shark eyes, wrapped his arm around her throat, while his partners flanked her. "Stop struggling, Ms. Voss. This doesn't have to be messy." "Like hell it doesn't." Isabella's voice carried the authority of someone who'd built an empire with her bare hands and wasn't about to let it crumble without a fight. From his position behind a concrete pillar, Ethan felt the familiar ache in his chest. The phantom pain of promises made to a woman who would never again sleep beside him. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, soft and broken from the cancer that had stolen her away. "Promise me, Ethan. Promise me you'll never go back to that life. Maya needs her father, not the ghost of a soldier." He'd made that promise 3 years ago, holding his wife's frail hand as machines beeped their countdown to forever. He'd meant it then, and he'd lived by it since becoming nothing more than shadows and silence, a man whose greatest achievement was being overlooked. But some promises, he was learning, were harder to keep than others. "The van's ready," one of the attackers spoke into his radio. 30 seconds, and we're mobile." 30 seconds. That's how long Isabella Voss had left before she disappeared into whatever hell these men had planned for her. 30 seconds before Ethan would have to live with the knowledge that he'd chosen his own safety over another human being's life. Maya needs her father. But what kind of father would he be if he became the kind of man who could watch evil triumph while he hid in the shadows? "Time's up," he whispered to himself and stepped into the light. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The mild-mannered janitor dissolved like morning mist, replaced by something altogether more dangerous. Ethan's shoulders squared, his posture shifted, and suddenly the parking garage felt smaller as if the very air had condensed around a predator, finally revealing his fangs. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone commenting on the weather. "Beautiful night for a kidnapping." All four heads turned toward him, Isabella's eyes widening in recognition of the man who'd been emptying her trash can for 6 months, the attackers' faces shifting through confusion, then calculation, then dismissal. "Walk away, janitor," the leader growled, tightening his grip on Isabella's throat. "This doesn't concern you." Ethan took a step closer, hands loose at his sides, looking for all the world like a man taking a casual stroll. "See, that's where you're wrong. Ms. Voss pays my salary. Technically, this is very much my concern." "I said walk away." The leader's hand moved to his jacket, reaching for a weapon. "I heard you the first time." Another step. "I'm just not very good at following orders." What happened next unfolded in a span of heartbeats, but for Ethan time stretched like taffy, each movement crystal clear, in the hyper-aware state he hadn't accessed in years. The leader's hand cleared his jacket, revealing the black steel of a Glock 19. Fast, but not fast enough. Ethan was already moving his body, remembering patterns drilled into muscle and bone during years of training that had cost more blood than money. He closed the distance in 3 flowing steps, his right hand snapping up to catch the gunman's wrist, while his left drove forward in a palm strike that caught the man's throat with surgical precision. The gun tumbled from nerveless fingers as the leader dropped to his knees, gasping like a landed fish. The second attacker lunged forward with a combat knife, the blade whistling through air where Ethan's head had been a microsecond before. Ethan flowed around the strike like water, his elbow coming up in a devastating arc that connected with the man's temple. The knife clattered to the concrete as its wielder crumpled. The third man, smarter than his partners, had released Isabella and was backing toward the van, his own weapon drawn and tracking. "You don't know who you're messing with, friend." "Actually," Ethan said, advancing with the relentless patience of an incoming tide. "I think I do." The gunman fired twice, center mass textbook shooting. But Ethan was no longer where the bullets expected him to be. He'd slipped sideways behind a concrete pillar, using the garage's architecture the way a dancer uses music. 12 rounds, Ethan called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "Standard magazine. You've got 10 left. Better make them count." Another shot sparked off concrete near his position. 9. "You know what your problem is." Ethan continued conversationally, moving from pillar to pillar with ghost-like silence. "You're thinking like a hunter, but you're not the hunter anymore." 3 more shots in rapid succession, spraying concrete dust into the air. 6. Isabella, freed from her captor's grip, had taken cover behind a Mercedes, her mind racing to process what she was witnessing. The quiet janitor who'd nodded politely to her for months had transformed into something out of her darkest thriller novels, a man who moved through violence like he was born to it. "Who are you?" she whispered, but her words were lost in the echo of another gunshot. 5 rounds left. Ethan emerged from behind a pillar, like a wraith closing ground faster than should have been humanly possible. The gunman's eyes widened as he tracked left, trying to lead his target, but Ethan had already shifted direction, flowing right instead. 2 more shots went wide. 3 rounds remaining. "Last chance," Ethan said now, close enough that the gunman could see his eyes, cold gray orbs that held depths better left unexplored. "Walk away." The gunman's response was predictable, a final desperate volley of shots at point-blank range. But Ethan had spent years learning to read intention in an opponent's micro-expressions, and he was already moving before the finger touched the trigger. He struck the gun aside with his left hand, while his right found the man's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs in a violent exhale. A knee to the ribs followed, then a textbook takedown that left the final attacker unconscious on the cold concrete. Silence settled over the parking garage like a burial shroud, broken only by the distant hum of ventilation systems and Isabella's rapid breathing. Ethan stood among the three unconscious forms, his gray uniform somehow still neat, despite the violence, looking once again like nothing more dangerous than a man whose job involved mops and disinfectant. But Isabella had seen behind the mask now, and there was no going back. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, emerging from behind the Mercedes on unsteady legs. What the hell just happened? Ethan was already moving, checking the attackers for additional weapons and identification with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. "You should call security," he said without looking up. "And probably the police." "Security?" Isabella's voice climbed an octave. "The police, you just took apart 3 armed men like you were swatting flies, and you want me to call security?" "Ma'am, with respect, I'm just the janitor." He found the leader's radio and crushed it under his heel. "I clean things up." Isabella stared at him, her CEO's mind spinning through possibilities and implications. Janitors don't move like that. Janitors don't fight like that. Who are you really? For a moment, Ethan's carefully constructed mask slipped, and Isabella caught a glimpse of something vast and dangerous swimming in the depths of his gray eyes, oceans of pain and secrets that could drown civilizations. "Someone who used to be somebody else," he said quietly. "But that man died a long time ago." "No." Isabella stepped closer, her heels clicking against concrete. "That man just saved my life." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Someone, security, police, or both, was coming. The real world was reasserting itself, dragging them back from the strange liminal space where violence and salvation danced together. "You need to go," Isabella said urgently, "before they get here. There will be questions, investigations." Ethan looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "Ms. Voss, I'm the janitor. Nobody's going to ask me anything except whether I saw something. And I didn't see anything except 3 men who attacked you and then mysteriously decided to take a nap." "But you were defending yourself," he continued, his voice taking on a hypnotic certainty. "Whoever taught you self-defense did an excellent job. You should be proud." Isabella opened her mouth to protest, but the garage suddenly filled with the strobing lights of emergency vehicles and the pounding footsteps of responding officers. In the chaos of activity that followed, paramedics checking her for injuries, detectives taking her statement, crime scene techs photographing everything, Ethan simply melted back into the background. He was just the janitor after all, part of the furniture, invisible. But Isabella's eyes tracked him throughout the entire ordeal, watching as he answered questions with the bland politeness of someone who cleaned up other people's messes for a living. She saw the way he positioned himself to always have clear sight lines and exit routes, noticed how his hands never quite relaxed, even when he was holding his mop. By the time the police finished their preliminary investigation and released the scene, it was nearly 3 a.m. Isabella sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders, and a cup of terrible coffee growing cold in her hands, watching Ethan Cole disappear into the maze of the parking garage with his squeaky cart. "Ma'am." Detective Rodriguez, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, approached with his notepad. "One more question. The 3 attackers, they were professionals. Military training, expensive equipment, coordinated approach. Any idea why someone would go to that kind of trouble to grab you?" Isabella's mind raced. She could think of a dozen reasons: hostile takeovers, corporate espionage. personal vendettas from business deals gone wrong. Shaw Industries was worth billions, and she'd made plenty of enemies climbing to the top of that particular mountain. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the man who'd materialized from the shadows to save her, then disappeared back into them as if he'd never existed at all. "No idea," she lied smoothly. "I'm just grateful I managed to fight them off." Detective Rodriguez nodded, making a note. "You did good, Ms. Voss. Real good. Most people would have frozen up in a situation like that." "I had excellent motivation," she replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. As the emergency vehicles finally departed and the parking garage returned to its tomb-like silence, Isabella stood alone among the chalk outlines and evidence markers still wrapped in her blanket. Her Aston Martin sat 20 feet away, gleaming under the harsh lights, but she made no move toward it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd never thought she'd use. "Catherine, it's Isabella. I know it's late, but I need you to run a complete background check on someone." "Yes, I know what time it is. His name is Ethan Cole. He works for our janitorial service." "No, I'm not having him investigated for theft. Just do it, Catherine. I need everything. Employment history, education, military service, family, everything." She hung up and finally walked toward her car, her bare feet silent against the cold concrete. As she reached for the door handle, something made her turn back toward the parking garage's depths. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw a figure in gray watching her from the shadows between the pillars. But when she blinked, there was nothing there except darkness and the ghost of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Isabella Voss had built her empire by understanding people, their motivations, their weaknesses, their hidden strengths. She could read a balance sheet like poetry and negotiate a merger like a chess grandmaster planning 20 moves ahead. But Ethan Cole was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma hidden behind a janitor's uniform and a carefully constructed facade of ordinary humanity. And Isabella had never met a puzzle she couldn't solve. As she drove out of the parking garage and into the pre-dawn darkness, one thought echoed in her mind, with crystalline clarity. Who is Ethan Cole, really? And why do I get the feeling that my life just became infinitely more complicated? Behind her in the shadows she'd left behind, Ethan Cole stood motionless for a long time after her taillights disappeared. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but inside his chest, a storm was raging. He'd broken his promise to Sarah. After 3 years of careful invisibility, he'd stepped back into the light, and there would be consequences. There were always consequences. His phone buzzed with a text message, and his blood turned to ice when he saw the sender, unknown number. "Nice work tonight, Wraith. But you can't hide forever. Some ghosts are harder to bury than others. LG." Ethan deleted the message and crushed the phone under his heel, adding it to the growing pile of destroyed evidence in the parking garage. But the damage was done. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. And that someone had just used a name that belonged to a dead man, a ghost who'd supposedly been buried along with his government file 3 years ago. Lucas Graves was supposed to be rotting in a federal prison, his assets seized, his network dismantled. The fact that he was not only free but actively communicating meant that the carefully constructed new life Ethan had built for himself and Maya was about to come crashing down. Maya. His daughter's name hit him like a physical blow, driving him to his knees in the empty parking garage. She was 8 years old, brilliant and beautiful, and utterly innocent of the darkness that had shaped her father's past. She believed he was a hero, not because of what he'd done in the shadows, but because he made her breakfast every morning and helped with her homework every night, and told her stories about her mother's courage. If Graves was back, if the past was catching up with him, then Maya was in danger, the kind of danger that could steal little girls in the night, and leave nothing behind but silence and regret. Ethan Cole, the janitor, the widow, the devoted father slowly stood up and walked toward the exit. But with each step, he felt another piece of his carefully constructed identity falling away like old paint. By the time he reached his car, the transformation was complete. The wraith was back, and God help anyone who tried to hurt his daughter. The morning sun painted Maya Cole's bedroom in shades of gold and promise, but Ethan stood in her doorway watching shadows instead of light. His 8-year-old daughter was still asleep, her dark hair spread across her pillow like spilled ink. One small hand clutching the stuffed elephant her mother had given her 3 years ago. She looked so much like Sarah in that moment. The same delicate features, the same peaceful expression that spoke of dreams untouched by nightmares. But where Sarah's eyes had been brown as autumn leaves, Maya's were gray as storm clouds, inheritance from a father whose past was catching up to him faster than he could run. "Daddy." Maya's voice was soft with sleep as her eyes fluttered open. "You're home early." "Hey, sweetheart." Ethan forced his voice into the gentle cadence Maya knew, burying the wraith's sharp edges beneath layers of practiced normalcy. "I finished work early. Thought maybe we could have pancakes for breakfast." Maya's face lit up like Christmas morning. "The ones with chocolate chips." "The ones with chocolate chips." He confirmed even as his mind cataloged exit routes and weapons caches and all the ways their small apartment could be breached by men who specialized in making people disappear. 20 minutes later, Maya sat at their tiny kitchen table, syrup-sticky fingers gesturing wildly as she recounted her latest adventure in 2nd grade. Ethan moved through the motions of domestic normalcy, flipping pancakes, pouring orange juice, listening to stories about playground politics, with the same attention he'd once given to intelligence briefings. But his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the street beyond their window, tracking every shadow that shifted in ways shadows shouldn't shift. "Mrs. Peterson says I'm the best reader in the whole class," Maya announced between bites. "She wants to move me up to the advanced group." "That's because you're brilliant," Ethan said, and meant it. Maya had her mother's mind, quick, curious, capable of seeing patterns others missed. It was a gift that could take her anywhere in the world if she lived long enough to use it. His phone buzzed against the counter, and Ethan's blood chilled when he saw the caller ID Shaw Industries. He'd given them this number when he'd started working there 6 months ago, but they'd never used it. Night shift janitors didn't get phone calls from corporate headquarters. "I have to take this, sweetheart," he said, ruffling Maya's hair. "Eat your pancakes." He stepped into the hallway and answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Mr. Cole." The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Catherine Martinez, personal assistant to Ms. Voss. She'd like to meet with you this morning if possible." Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "I'm not scheduled to work until tonight. Ms. Voss is aware of that. She's willing to compensate you for your time. Would 10 a.m. work, her private office executive floor?" It wasn't really a request, and they both knew it. When the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation wanted to see you, you went. The only question was whether you walked in under your own power or got dragged. "I'll be there," Ethan said. "Excellent. Security will be expecting you." The line went dead, leaving Ethan staring at his phone and wondering how many other landmines were buried in the carefully constructed life he'd built for himself and Maya. "Daddy." Maya appeared in the hallway, syrup still decorating her chin. "Who was that? Why, work," he said, which was technically true. "I have to go in for a little while this morning. Mrs. Chen will watch you until I get back." Maya's face fell. "But it's Saturday. We were going to go to the park." The park. They'd planned to feed the ducks and maybe fly the kite Sarah had bought, but never lived to see soar. Simple pleasures for a simple life that was rapidly becoming anything but. "We'll go this afternoon," Ethan promised, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "I just have to take care of something first." "Promise? Promise." He hoped it was a promise he'd be alive to keep. An hour later, Ethan stood in the marble and steel cathedral of Shaw Industries, watching his reflection fracture in the polished surfaces that surrounded him. He'd showered and changed into his best clothes, dark jeans, white button-down leather jacket that had cost more than most people made in a month. But even dressed like a civilian, he felt naked without the weapons and tactical gear that had once been as natural as breathing. The executive elevator climbed toward heaven in absolute silence, carrying him toward a reckoning he'd been trying to avoid for 3 years. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, Catherine Martinez was waiting, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming in on such short notice." "Ms. Martinez." He followed her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than his annual salary. "I have to ask, is this about last night?" "Ms. Voss will explain everything." They stopped at a set of double doors that looked like they'd been carved from a single piece of mahogany. Catherine knocked twice, then opened the left door without waiting for a response. "Ms. Voss, Mr. Cole is here." Isabella Voss's office was a study in controlled power floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city furniture that whispered rather than shouted its expense and enough square footage to park a small aircraft. But Ethan's attention fixed immediately on the woman behind the desk. She'd traded last night's torn evening wear for a charcoal business suit that hugged her curves like armor, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that belonged in boardrooms and merger negotiations. But there were details that spoke of the woman beneath the corporate veneer, the way her fingers drummed against her desk. The slight shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, the barely perceptible tension in her shoulders that suggested coiled springs waiting to release. "Thank you, Catherine. Close the door, please." Catherine retreated, leaving Ethan alone with one of the most powerful women in the country, and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed new life was about to implode. "Please sit." Isabella gestured to one of the leather chairs facing her desk. "Can I offer you coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Ethan remained standing, old habits keeping him mobile and ready. "Ms. Voss, if this is about last night, it's about a lot of things, Mr. Cole. But let's start with this." She turned her computer monitor toward him, and Ethan felt the bottom drop out of his world. The screen showed a military personnel file, his file supposedly buried so deep it would take a nuclear weapon to excavate it. Classified. Eyes only. Subject: Cole Ethan, James rank, Captain. Special Operations Unit. Task Force, Ghost. Call sign, Wraith status, KIA. Cover status: there was more mission summaries, commendations, psychological evaluations, but Ethan had stopped reading after the first line. Someone had dug up a dead man, and dead men were supposed to stay buried. "How did you get this?" His voice was steady, but Isabella caught the dangerous undertone that suggested predators moving in tall grass. "I have excellent researchers," she said simply. "The question is, why does a decorated special operations officer spend his nights mopping floors and emptying trash cans?" Ethan moved to the window, looking down at the city spread below like a circuit board of light and shadow. From this height, people looked like ants, their problems invisible and insignificant. But he knew better than most that significance was a matter of perspective. "That man is dead," he said finally. "Has been for 3 years. Officially, yes. Unofficially, he saved my life last night." Isabella rose from her desk and joined him at the window, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches. I don't like mysteries, Mr. Cole. They make me nervous. And nervous CEOs make poor decisions. Nervous CEOs hire better security. She turned to face him, and Ethan found himself looking into eyes the color of emeralds and just as hard. I'm offering you a job. I already have a job. You have a cover. There's a difference. Isabella moved back to her desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. I know about Maya. I know about Sarah. I know you've been running from something for 3 years, and I know that whatever it is finally caught up to you last night. Ethan went very still the way apex predators do when they're deciding whether to flee or fight. Stay away from my daughter. I'm not threatening her, Mr. Cole. I'm trying to protect her. Isabella opened the folder and spread its contents across her desk, photographs, documents, intelligence reports that should have been impossible for a civilian to obtain. Tell me, do you recognize this man? The photograph showed a face Ethan had hoped never to see again, sharp features, pale eyes, and a smile that belonged on sharks and serial killers. Lucas Graves looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, which meant he'd been using the intervening time to plan something elaborate and unpleasant. Lucas Graves. Ethan said the name tasting like poison on his tongue. He's supposed to be in federal prison. He was, until 6 months ago, when certain charges were mysteriously dropped due to procedural errors in his prosecution. Isabella's voice carried the acid bite of someone who understood exactly how justice could be purchased. 3 weeks later, he started making inquiries about Shaw Industries, about me specifically. What kind of inquiries? The kind that involve shell companies and offshore accounts and very expensive mercenaries. Isabella gathered the photographs and documents back into a neat stack. The kind that end with people disappearing in parking garages. Ethan felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't like. You think last night was Graves? I think last night was a test. He wanted to see what kind of protection I had, how I'd react under pressure. Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I don't think he expected his test subjects to end up unconscious on a parking garage floor. So what do you want from me? I want to hire the Wraith. The words hung in the air between them, like a challenge thrown down in an empty arena. Ethan had spent 3 years trying to bury that name, that identity, that part of himself that had been forged in blood and shadow. The Wraith was everything. Ethan Cole, the janitor, was not dangerous, ruthless, effective in ways that left bodies in his wake and nightmares in his dreams. The Wraith is dead, he said again. The Wraith is standing in my office looking like he wants to break something. Isabella's voice softened, losing some of its corporate edge. Look, I've read your file. I know what you've lost, what you've sacrificed. I know you made promises to your wife about leaving that life behind. Then you know why I can't help you. I know why you think you can't. But consider this, Lucas Graves isn't going away. Men like him don't forgive and they don't forget. He's going to keep coming, keep escalating until he gets what he wants. Isabella moved closer, close enough that Ethan could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Right now he wants me. But what happens when he decides the best way to hurt you is through Maya? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and replacing it with ice-cold terror. Maya asleep in her bed with her stuffed elephant. Maya trusting and innocent and utterly defenseless against monsters who specialized in taking away everything that mattered. What are you proposing? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A partnership. You become my head of security official above board with a salary that reflects your actual qualifications. In exchange, I give you the resources to end the Lucas Graves problem permanently. And Maya gets the best private security money can buy: a trust fund that ensures her future and a father who doesn't have to hide in the shadows anymore. Isabella returned to her desk and pulled out a contract thick enough to choke a horse. Read it. Think about it. But don't think too long. Graves won't wait forever to make his next move. Ethan took the contract but didn't open it. Why me? You could hire any security firm in the country. Security firms didn't save my life last night. Security firms don't move like ghosts and fight like demons. Security firms don't have personal reasons to want Lucas Graves dead. Isabella's smile was predatory now, all sharp edges and hidden meanings. And security firms don't know him the way you do. What makes you think I know Graves? Because 3 years ago, Task Force Ghost was disbanded after a classified operation went wrong. Official records are sealed, but certain details have a way of surfacing if you know where to look. Isabella opened another file on her computer, and Ethan felt his past crawling out of its grave like a zombie in a horror movie. Operation Nightfall. Your team was tasked with eliminating an arms dealer who'd been selling weapons to terrorist organizations. But the arms dealer had protection, a private military contractor named Lucas Graves. The words triggered a cascade of memories. Ethan had spent 3 years trying to forget. The mission briefing. The intelligence that turned out to be wrong. The ambush that left half his team dead and the other half wishing they were. The operation was a trap, he said, his voice hollow as an empty grave. Graves knew we were coming. Because someone told him. Someone with access to classified intelligence and no conscience about selling it to the highest bidder. Isabella's voice was gentle now, understanding in a way that surprised him. Your team walked into a kill box, and you were the only one who walked out. Not the only one. The words came out like broken glass. Tommy Martinez made it to the extraction point. Took a bullet through the lung, but he was breathing when the medics got him. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with suppressed fury. He died 3 days later. Infection. Said he was sorry he couldn't finish the mission. I'm sorry. Tommy had a daughter, Maria. She was 5 when he died. Ethan looked up and Isabella saw something in his gray eyes that made her take a step back. She's 8 now. Same age as Maya. Lives with her grandmother in Texas because her father died trying to stop a monster from selling weapons to people who blow up schools and hospitals. Isabella felt something twist in her chest, not quite sympathy, not quite guilt, but something that tasted like both. She'd built her empire by making hard choices and living with the consequences, but she'd never had to explain to a child why Daddy wasn't coming home. Help me stop him, she said simply. Help me make sure no other children lose their fathers to Lucas Graves. Ethan was quiet for a long time, staring out at the city below. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. I'll need a team. People I trust. Done. Full tactical support. Weapons, equipment, intelligence. Whatever you need. And Maya stays protected. 24/7 security but invisible. She can't know she's being watched. Of course. Ethan turned away from the window and looked at Isabella. Really looked at her, seeing past the corporate armor to the woman beneath. She was beautiful, brilliant, and dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with boardroom politics. But more than that, she was offering him something he'd thought was lost forever, a chance to be the man he'd been before grief and guilt had driven him into the shadows. There's one more thing, he said. Name it. When this is over, when Graves is dead and buried and no longer a threat to anyone, we walk away. Maya and I disappear, and you forget you ever knew a man named Ethan Cole. Isabella felt something cold settle in her stomach at the thought of Ethan vanishing from her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. In the space of 12 hours, he'd saved her life and turned her carefully ordered world upside down. The idea of losing him felt wrong in ways she couldn't quite name. "If that's what you want," she said, and hoped her voice didn't betray the sudden emptiness the prospect left in her chest. "It's what has to happen." Ethan moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. "Ms. Voss, Isabella, last night when you were fighting those men, you were magnificent." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "I was terrified." Terror and magnificence aren't mutually exclusive. The bravest people I've ever known were absolutely terrified when they did their most heroic things. Ethan's smile was small but genuine, transforming his face in ways that made Isabella's breath catch. "Your mother would have been proud." And then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone in her office with a contract nobody would sign and questions nobody could answer. She moved to the window and watched him emerge from the building, 50 floors below, a small figure in leather and denim, walking toward a future that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd built. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "Board meeting in 10 minutes. The Peterson merger won't negotiate itself." Isabella deleted the message without responding. For the first time in her career, a merger seemed less important than the mystery of a man who fought like a demon and loved like a saint, who'd traded bullets for mop buckets and somehow made both look like weapons of war. She had a feeling that Lucas Graves was about to learn a lesson, that arms dealers and corporate raiders rarely survived some ghosts, when properly motivated, could rise from the dead with vengeance in their hearts and blood on their hands. And the wraith she suspected was about to become very motivated indeed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park, as Maya Chase pitched breadcrumbs to the ducks with the focused intensity of a general commanding troops. Ethan watched from a bench 20 feet away, his eyes tracking not just his daughter, but every jogger, dog walker, and family that moved through their sphere of existence. "Daddy, the black one with the white stripe, isn't getting any food," Maya called out, her voice carrying the particular outrage 8-year-olds reserved for perceived injustices. "The other ducks are being bullies." "Life's not always fair, sweetheart," Ethan replied, but he was watching a man in a Yankees cap who'd been reading the same newspaper page for 10 minutes. "Sometimes you have to fight for what you want." Maya considered this with the gravity of a philosopher contemplating the nature of existence. "Then I'll fight for the duck." She marched closer to the pond's edge, positioning herself between the aggressive waterfowl and their smaller target, scattering breadcrumbs with military precision. The smaller duck paddled over gratefully, and Maya beamed with the satisfaction of a problem solved through direct action. Ethan's phone buzzed twice the signal he'd arranged with Isabella. His pulse quickened as he opened the encrypted message. "Graves is moving. Your apartment. Now." The world shifted into hyper-aware focus colors, becoming sharper sounds more distinct. The Yankees cap man was no longer reading his paper. He was talking into his sleeve in words too quiet to hear, but with body language that screamed tactical communication. "Maya." Ethan's voice carried the calm authority that had once directed special operations missions. "Come here, sweetheart. We need to go." "But the ducks aren't finished eating." "They'll be fine. Come on." Something in his tone made Maya look up sharply. She'd inherited more than just her mother's intelligence. She had an 8-year-old's finely tuned instinct for when adults were lying about everything being okay. Are we in trouble? She asked, as she walked back to him, her small hand slipping automatically into his. No trouble, but we're going to play a game. Ethan stood casually scanning the park for additional watchers. He counted at least 3, possibly more. Remember the games Mommy used to play with you hide and seek? Maya's eyes widened with understanding that made Ethan's heart ache. Sarah had trained their daughter for this possibility during the long nights when cancer stole sleep and left only whispered contingency plans. His wife had been a CIA analyst before Maya was born, and she'd understood better than most how the past could reach out with bloody fingers to drag the living back into darkness. The serious kind of hide and seek, Maya said quietly. The serious kind. Can you do that for me? I can do anything for you, Daddy. They walked toward the park's exit with the unhurried pace of a father and daughter finishing a pleasant afternoon. But Ethan's mind was calculating angles and distances and the 17 different ways to kill a man with objects found in a typical playground. Yankee's Cap was paralleling their movement, trying to stay casual, but his partner, a woman in workout clothes who'd been stretching by the same tree for 15 minutes, was closing from the opposite direction. Ethan's car was parked 3 blocks away, which might as well have been 3 miles if Graves had positioned a proper surveillance team. But Sarah had taught him more than just how to love. She'd taught him how to think like prey when being prey was the only way to survive. Maya, do you see the ice cream truck? She followed his gaze to the cheerfully painted vehicle parked at the corner, its tinkling melody drawing children like a musical Pied Piper. Can we get ice cream? We're going to walk over there, and when I tell you, you're going to run to Mrs. Chen's apartment. Remember the address? 427 Oak Street, apartment 2B. Good girl. Tell her code silver and stay with her until I come get you. Maya nodded solemnly. Code Silver was another of Sarah's legacies, a phrase that meant drop everything and protect my daughter because the monsters are real and they're coming. They approached the ice cream truck with the leisurely pace of people who had nowhere urgent to be, but Ethan could feel the net tightening around them. Yankee's Cap had closed to within 30 feet. Workout Woman was approaching from the east. And there, a third figure emerging from behind a maintenance shed, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who killed people for money. Daddy? Maya's voice was very small. I'm scared. I know, sweetheart. But remember what Mommy always said, brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing the right thing anyway. That's my girl. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. When I say run, you run fast as you can to Mrs. Chen's. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. Can you do that? What about you? I'll be right behind you. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but some lies were acts of love rather than deception. They reached the ice cream truck, joining the small cluster of families gathered around its serving window. Ethan positioned himself so Maya was shielded by his body and the truck's bulk scanning faces and calculating odds. Yankee's Cap was 20 feet away and closing. Workout Woman had stopped pretending to exercise and was walking directly toward them. The third man, tall, dark hair, military bearing, was approaching from the rear. Professional, coordinated, probably armed. Ethan made his decision. Vanilla cone with sprinkles, he told the ice cream vendor, his voice carrying perfectly normal parental patience. Then quieter to Maya. On my mark. 3, 2. Yankee's Cap's hand moved toward his jacket, reaching for something that wasn't a wallet. Run. Maya took off like a sprinter from starting blocks, her small legs pumping as she darted between families and headed toward the park's northern exit. Yankee's Cap hesitated for a crucial half-second, torn between pursuing the child and dealing with the father. Ethan made the choice for him. He moved with liquid violence, covering the distance to Yankee's cap in 3 flowing steps. His left hand trapped the man's gun arm while his right drove upward in a palm strike that snapped the watcher's head back and dropped him like a sack of grain. Workout Woman was already drawing her weapon, but Ethan was no longer where she expected him to be. He'd rolled behind a cluster of families using civilian shields in a way that would have horrified him 3 years ago, but seemed perfectly reasonable when his daughter's life hung in the balance. The third man was better, faster, more experienced. He'd anticipated Ethan's movement and was already flanking left, trying to cut off escape routes. But he'd made the mistake of thinking like a hunter instead of a father. Ethan grabbed the ice cream truck's fire extinguisher and triggered it in a white cloud that turned the peaceful family gathering into a scene from a disaster movie. Children screamed, parents shouted, and in the chaos of chemical fog and panic, 3 shots were fired at targets that were no longer there. When the smoke cleared, Ethan Cole had vanished like smoke himself, leaving behind only 2 unconscious watchers and a third man with a dislocated shoulder who was discovering that shooting at ghosts was remarkably unrewarding work. Maya was halfway to Oak Street when she heard the commotion behind her, but she didn't turn around. Mommy had been very clear about that rule when Daddy said, "Run, you ran until you reached safety." Looking back was how little girls got hurt, and Maya had no intention of disappointing either of her parents. She burst through the door of Mrs. Chen's apartment building like a small hurricane, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite her short legs. The elderly woman answered her frantic knocking immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. "Code Silver," Maya gasped, still breathing hard from her sprint. Mrs. Chen's weathered face went pale, but her voice was steady. "Come in, child, quickly." The apartment door closed with multiple locks clicking into place, and Maya found herself in the familiar warmth of Mrs. Chen's living room. The old woman had been their neighbor since Maya could remember, a grandmother figure who babysat during Ethan's work shifts and never asked questions about why a janitor needed someone who'd once been a combat medic in the Korean War. "Your father, Mrs. Chen asked, moving to the window and carefully adjusting the blinds to create a narrow viewing angle. "He said he'd be right behind me." Maya curled up on the couch, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. "But he always says that." Mrs. Chen nodded with the understanding of someone who'd lived through enough wars to recognize the sound of necessary lies. "Your father is very good at taking care of himself, little one, and very good at taking care of you." "I know, but I wish we didn't have to play these games." "I know." Mrs. Chen settled beside her, wrapping a protective arm around Maya's shoulders. "But sometimes, games are the only way to stay safe in a world that isn't always kind to good people." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the city's afternoon symphony, car horns and sirens, and the distant sound of life continuing normally for people whose fathers didn't have to fight monsters in public parks. 20 minutes later, Ethan's knock came in the predetermined pattern: 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick again. Mrs. Chen checked the peephole twice before opening the door, and Maya launched herself into her father's arms with the desperate relief of someone who'd been trying very hard to be brave. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her small hands patting his face and arms as if searching for damage. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Ethan held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and sunshine, and innocence that hadn't yet been completely stolen by his past. "But we can't go home for a while." "How long is a while?" "I don't know yet." Maya considered this with 8-year-old pragmatism. "Will Mrs. Chen come with us?" "If she wants to," Ethan said, looking over Maya's head at the elderly woman who'd become family, without either of them quite realizing when it happened. "Someone needs to keep an eye on you too," Mrs. Chen said, with the dry humor that had helped her survive 7 decades of watching the world try to destroy itself. And I've been thinking about taking a vacation anyway. Ethan's phone buzzed with another encrypted message from Isabella. Safe house ready. Black SUV corner of 5th and Main. License plate starts with GHZ. We need to go, he told Maya gently. Someone's coming to pick us up. Someone you trust. Someone I'm learning to trust. They gathered the few essentials Mrs. Chen kept packed for emergencies, another legacy of wars and upheavals that had taught entire generations to be ready to run at a moment's notice. As they prepared to leave, Maya looked up at her father with eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. Daddy, are we ever going to stop running? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow, driving home the reality of what his choices had cost his daughter. Maya should be worried about homework and playground politics, not escape routes and safe houses. She should believe the world was good and safe and full of people who wanted to protect children instead of hurt them. Yes, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Very soon, we're going to stop running forever. Promise. Promise. It was another lie that tasted like love, but Ethan intended to make it true, even if it killed him. The black SUV was waiting exactly where Isabella had promised, its tinted windows, reflecting the late afternoon sun like dark mirrors. Behind the wheel sat a woman Ethan didn't recognize, mid-30s, short red hair, eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She looked like someone who'd learned violence in the same schools Ethan had attended, which was either very reassuring or very dangerous, depending on whose side she was on. Cole, she asked as they approached. That's me. Diana Ross, not the singer. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Ms. Voss sent me to collect you and your family. Your security. I'm whatever Ms. Voss needs me to be. Today I'm a taxi driver with a concealed carry permit and a very low tolerance for people who threaten children. Diana's eyes found Maya in the rearview mirror as they settled into the vehicle. Don't worry, sweetheart. The adults are going to take very good care of you. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? Maya asked with the directness that made adults squirm. I'm one of the good guys, Diana replied seriously. Your daddy is one of the good guys too, even when he has to do things that look scary. I know. Daddy's a hero. Diana's eyes flicked to Ethan in the mirror, and he saw something that might have been respect. Yes, he is. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, taking a route that wound through neighborhoods and side streets in patterns designed to shake any potential surveillance. Diana drove like someone who'd learned defensive techniques in environments where mistakes meant body bags, and Ethan found himself relaxing fractionally as they put distance between Maya and the men who'd tried to take her. Where are we going? Mrs. Chen asked from the front passenger seat. Somewhere safe, Diana replied. Ms. Voss has a property outside the city. Very private, very secure. You'll be comfortable there while the adults handle business. What kind of business? Maya asked. Ethan met Diana's eyes in the mirror, and something passed between them, an understanding between people who'd seen too much darkness to believe in easy answers. The kind that makes sure little girls can feed ducks in the park without worrying about bad men, Diana said. Oh, Maya considered this. That sounds like important business. The most important, Ethan agreed. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling estate 30 miles outside the city, hidden behind walls and electronic gates that spoke of security measures designed by people who understood that privacy was often a matter of life and death. The main house was modern and elegant, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow managed to feel both open and fortress-like. Isabella was waiting for them on the front steps, having traded her business suit for jeans and a cashmere sweater that made her look younger and somehow more vulnerable. When Maya climbed out of the SUV, Isabella knelt down to her level with the unconscious grace of someone who understood that children deserved to be met at eye level. "You must be Maya," she said softly. "I'm Isabella. I work with your father." Maya studied her with the intense scrutiny 8-year-olds reserved for adults who might or might not be trustworthy. "Are you the one who's helping Daddy stop the bad men?" "I'm trying to help, yes." "Good. Daddy needs help sometimes, even though he pretends he doesn't." Isabella's eyes found Ethan over Maya's head, and something warm and complicated passed between them. Acknowledgement of truths that couldn't be spoken aloud, but were understood nonetheless. "Why don't we get you settled in?" Isabella suggested. "There's a room upstairs with a view of the lake, and I think there might be a family of swans who could use someone to feed them." Maya's face lit up with the first genuine smile she'd worn since the park. "Really? Really? Mrs. Chen, there's a guest suite on the ground floor with a kitchenette if you'd prefer your privacy." "Thank you, dear." Mrs. Chen's eyes held the same careful assessment she'd given Ethan when he'd first moved into their building. "You're very kind to strangers." "You're not strangers. You're family to Ethan, which makes you important to me." The casual declaration hung in the air, like a promise or a threat, depending on interpretation. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of walls he'd built around his heart after Sarah's death. Isabella was looking at Maya with the soft focus of someone discovering unexpected maternal instincts, and Maya was responding with the openness children reserved for adults who treated them like complete human beings rather than amusing pets. "Can I see the swans now?" Maya asked. "Of course. Mrs. Chen, would you like to join us? The guest room can wait." As they walked toward the lake behind the house, Diana fell into step beside Ethan. "She's good with kids," she observed. "Isabella, yes, she is." "That surprises you?" Ethan considered the question. "She runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I didn't expect her to have time for maternal instincts." "Maybe she's discovering she has more time than she thought." Diana's smile held layers of meaning Ethan wasn't quite ready to examine. "Or maybe she's discovering that some things are worth making time for." They reached the lake's edge where a family of swans was indeed gliding across the water with serene majesty. Maya clapped her hands in delight, and Isabella produced a bag of appropriate swan food from somewhere in her designer purse. "You came prepared," Ethan noted. "I researched what swans eat," Isabella replied, as if this was perfectly normal behavior for a CEO. "Bread is actually bad for them. They need proper nutrition." "You researched swan nutrition?" "I research everything that might affect people I care about." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Ethan found himself studying Isabella's profile as she helped Maya scatter food for the swans. There was something about the way she moved, the careful attention she paid to Maya's excited chatter, the genuine smile that transformed her face from corporate beautiful to something much more dangerous. "Tell me about Graves," he said quietly, pitching his voice below Maya's hearing range. Isabella's expression hardened, the CEO reasserting herself over the woman who fed swans with 8-year-olds. "He's escalating faster than we anticipated. The men in the park were just the opening move." "What's the main event?" "Tomorrow night. Shaw Industries is hosting a charity gala, 500 of the city's most powerful people in one place. Perfect target for someone who wants to make a statement." Ethan felt ice form in his veins. "You're not thinking of going." "I'm not thinking of hiding." Isabella's voice carried the steel that had built her empire. "This is my company, my life, my fight. I won't run from Lucas Graves." "He'll be expecting that. I'm counting on it." Isabella's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Graves wants to play games, fine. but he's about to learn that some people play for keeps. Maya came running back to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement and swan feathers in her hair. Isabella. The big one with the black neck, let me pet him, his name is Neptune. How do you know his name? Isabella asked, settling into the conversation with the easy grace of someone who genuinely enjoyed talking to children. I asked him, and that's what he told me. You speak Swan. I speak lots of languages. Daddy taught me. Maya looked up at Ethan with pride that made his chest tight. He says understanding different languages helps you understand different people. Your daddy is very wise. He's the smartest daddy in the whole world, and the bravest, and the strongest. Maya paused, considering. Are you going to marry him? The question hit both adults like a thunderbolt, leaving them staring at each other across a chasm of implications neither was prepared to address. Isabella's cheeks flushed pink, and Ethan looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Maya, he began. It's okay, Daddy. Mommy said you might find someone new someday, and that would be okay, because love doesn't run out. Maya looked between them with 8-year-old wisdom. Isabella looks at you the way Mommy used to look at you, and you look at her the way you looked at Mommy before she got sick. From the mouths of babes came truths that adults spent years avoiding. Ethan felt Sarah's presence like a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice whispering the words she'd spoken during those final weeks. Don't you dare spend the rest of your life alone because you think I'd be jealous. I want you to be happy, Ethan. I want you to love again. Sometimes, Isabella said carefully, adults need time to figure out their feelings. That's silly, Maya declared with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own emotions. Either you love someone or you don't. It's not complicated. You might be right. Isabella agreed, her eyes finding Ethan's and holding them. Maybe adults just make things more complicated than they need to be. The moment stretched between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but the foundation was there, built on violence and trust, and a little girl's innocent observation about the way two people looked at each other. Diana's voice cut through the tension from somewhere behind them. Boss, we've got company. They turned to see a black sedan approaching on the private road that led to the estate, its tinted windows reflecting the setting sun like dark mirrors. The car moved with the measured pace of people who belonged here, but Diana's hand had moved instinctively toward her concealed weapon. Expecting anyone? She asked Isabella. No. Ethan was already moving, positioning himself between Maya and the approaching vehicle, while his mind calculated distances and cover positions. Maya, Mrs. Chen, back to the house. Now. But the Swans? Now. Something in his voice brooked no argument. Maya took Mrs. Chen's hand, and they hurried toward the main house, leaving the three adults standing by the lake like sentries preparing for war. The sedan stopped at the circular drive, and two men emerged, well-dressed, professional, radiating the particular confidence of people who were very good at violence and had been doing it for a long time. But they kept their hands visible and their movements deliberate, which suggested they'd come to talk rather than fight. For now. The driver was tall and lean with silver hair and eyes like winter morning, cold, clear, and utterly without mercy. His passenger was younger, darker built like a linebacker, who'd learned to wear expensive suits. Both men radiated the particular danger of apex predators who'd learned to dress like investment bankers. Ms. Voss, the silver-haired man called out, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. Mr. Cole, I believe we have matters to discuss. Do we know you? Isabella replied, her voice pitched to carry authority despite the circumstances. Not personally, no. But we have a mutual acquaintance who's very eager to renew old friendships. The man's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "My name is Victor Petrov, and I have a message from Lucas Graves." Victor Petrov's smile never wavered as he approached his movements, carrying the fluid confidence of a man who'd learned violence in places where mistakes meant unmarked graves. His younger companion flanked him at a careful distance, close enough to provide support, far enough to avoid crossfire if the conversation went sideways. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Petrov," Isabella said, her voice carrying the cool authority she'd perfected in boardrooms, where billion-dollar deals lived or died on the strength of a single word. "I don't recall making any appointments today." "Appointments are for people who have the luxury of planning their futures," Victor replied, his accent adding an edge to words that were already sharp enough to cut. "Some conversations require more immediate attention." Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and Isabella, with movements that looked casual but positioned him for maximum tactical advantage. "You mentioned a message." "Ah, the famous wraith." Victor's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement or anticipation. "Lucas has told me so much about you. He speaks of you often, usually while breaking expensive objects." "I seem to have that effect on people." "Indeed. It's a rare talent inspiring such passionate hatred in men who pride themselves on emotional control." Victor reached into his jacket slowly, telegraphing the movement to avoid any unfortunate misunderstandings. "But perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, away from innocent ears." Through the main house's floor-to-ceiling windows, Maya could be seen sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen, both of them watching the adult conversation with the focused attention of people who understood that their safety might depend on its outcome. "Here is fine," Ethan said flatly. "Say what you came to say." Victor's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "Very well. Lucas Graves extends his compliments to Ms. Voss on her excellent taste in bodyguards. He's quite impressed with your recent performance." "Flattery doesn't suit him," Isabella said. "Neither does cowardice. If Graves has something to say, he can say it himself." "Lucas is many things, Ms. Voss, but a coward isn't one of them. He simply prefers to delegate certain tasks to people with appropriate skill sets." Victor's gaze flicked to Diana, who had positioned herself with clear sightlines and easy access to cover. "He's also a pragmatist. He understands that unnecessary violence serves no one's interests." "Could have fooled me," Ethan said. 3 men with guns in a parking garage seems pretty violent." A test. Lucas needed to understand what he was dealing with. Victor pulled a white envelope from his jacket and held it out. "Consider this an invitation to more civilized discourse." Isabella made no move to take the envelope. "What kind of invitation?" "Tomorrow evening's charity gala. Lucas will be attending as my guest completely legitimately, I assure you. He's quite eager to discuss certain mutual interests with both of you. And if we decline..." Victor's smile took on a predatory edge. "Lucas is a patient man, but his patience has limits. He's invested considerable time and resources in resolving this situation amicably, but there are other approaches available if diplomacy fails." The threat hung in the air like poisonous gas, invisible but deadly. Ethan felt familiar ice crystallize in his veins, the cold clarity that came when violence shifted from possibility to inevitability. "You're threatening my daughter," he said quietly. "I'm delivering a message," Victor corrected. "What you choose to read into that message is entirely your interpretation." "Let me give you my interpretation." Ethan's voice carried the flat finality of a headsman's axe. "If Lucas Graves or anyone working for him comes within a mile of my daughter, I will find him, and I will kill him. Slowly, creatively, and I will make sure he understands exactly why he's dying. Victor's companion shifted slightly, his hand drifting toward his jacket, but Victor himself seemed delighted by the response. There's the wraith we've heard so much about. Lucas will be pleased to know his old friend hasn't lost his edge. We're not friends. No, you're something much more interesting. Your unfinished business. Victor placed the envelope on a nearby stone table and stepped back. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. The Grand Ballroom at the Metropolitan Hotel. Black tie optional, but Lucas does appreciate proper formal wear. And if we don't show, then Lucas will assume you're not interested in peaceful resolution. Victor's smile was all sharp edges now, and he'll explore other options, more direct options. Options that might involve late-night visits to suburban apartments where little girls sleep with stuffed elephants. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, driving home the reality that his enemies knew things about Maya they shouldn't know, intimate details about her life, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Someone had been watching his daughter, cataloging her routines, preparing contingencies that made his blood turn to liquid nitrogen. You've been watching her. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of apocalyptic violence. Lucas is thorough in his preparations. He believes in understanding all the variables in any equation. Victor's tone remained conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than threats against a child. But he's also a businessman. He prefers negotiations that benefit everyone involved. What does he want? Why don't you ask him tomorrow night? Diana had moved closer during the conversation, her professional instincts recognizing the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded violence. Gentlemen, I think you've delivered your message. Time to go. Victor inclined his head politely. Of course. We wouldn't want to overstay our welcome. He looked directly at Isabella. Ms. Voss, I do hope you'll consider Lucas's invitation carefully. He's gone to considerable trouble to arrange a civilized meeting. Tell Graves he'll have his meeting, Isabella said, her voice steady, despite the fury burning in her emerald eyes. But if any harm comes to Maya or Mrs. Chen or anyone else under my protection, the next conversation he has will be with a mortician. Understood. Until tomorrow evening, then. Victor and his companion returned to their sedan, with the same measured pace they'd used approaching, leaving behind the envelope and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with barely contained menace. As their car disappeared down the private road, silence settled over the estate like a burial shroud. Well, Diana said finally, that was pleasant. Ethan picked up the envelope, examining it for any signs of tampering or chemical traces. It was expensive, stationery, cream-colored with gold edges, the kind used for wedding invitations and funeral announcements. Inside was a formal invitation to the Shaw Industries charity gala, printed on matching paper with elegant calligraphy. He's got style, Isabella admitted grudgingly. I'll give him that. Style doesn't make him less dangerous. Ethan studied the invitation, as if it might reveal hidden meanings. If anything, it makes him more dangerous. Men who kill with good manners are the worst kind of monsters. So what do we do? Ethan looked toward the house where Maya was still sitting at the kitchen table, now helping Mrs. Chen prepare what looked like an elaborate tea service for stuffed animals. His daughter's laughter drifted through the evening air, a sound so pure and innocent, it made his chest ache with the need to protect it from everything dark and cruel in the world. We give him what he wants, Ethan said finally, which is me. Ethan folded the invitation and slipped it into his pocket. He wants to finish what we started 3 years ago. This whole thing, the parking garage, the corporate takeover, even going after you, it's all just been a way to flush me out of hiding. Isabella felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're not seriously considering walking into an obvious trap. I'm considering ending this before it gets worse. Ethan's voice carried the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Graves isn't going to stop. Men like him don't forgive and they don't forget. As long as I'm alive, Maya will never be safe. So your solution is to get yourself killed. My solution is to kill him first. The words hung between them like a challenge thrown down in an empty arena. Isabella had built her empire by calculating risks and making hard choices, but the thought of losing Ethan felt like a calculation she couldn't bear to make. There has to be another way. There is. Ethan's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. We use Graves's trap against him. He wants a meeting, we give him a meeting. But we control the terms. How? The charity gala is perfect cover. 500 witnesses, security cameras, media coverage. Even Graves can't disappear someone in front of that many people. Ethan's mind was already working through possibilities, contingencies, the 17 different ways to kill a man in a room full of society's elite. But we need to make sure Maya is somewhere he can't reach her. She'll be safe here. Diana will stay with her and Mrs. Chen. Not good enough. He found this place once, he can find it again. Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't accessed in years. But I know someone who owes me a favor. Someone Graves will never find. The call connected on the second ring, answered by a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with cigarettes and too many years of hard living. Jesus Christ, Ethan, is that really you? Hello, Marcus? Thought you were dead, brother. We all thought you were dead. Marcus Rodriguez, former Delta Force current private security contractor and one of the few men Ethan trusted with his life. More importantly, one of the few men he'd trust with Maya's life. I need a favor, Marcus. Name it. I need you to take care of someone for me. Someone important. Somewhere completely off the grid. How long? Couple days. Maybe longer. There was a pause filled with the weight of old friendships and older debts. This about that mess 3 years ago, Graves. You heard about that. Brother, everyone heard about that. Task Force Ghost getting wiped out made waves all the way up to the Pentagon. Marcus's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions about classified operations. Word was you were the only one who made it out. Word was wrong, but that's a conversation for another time. Fair enough. Where do you want me to pick up your package? Ethan looked toward the house where Maya was now setting up what appeared to be an elaborate tea party for her stuffed animals, Mrs. Chen playing along with the gravity of someone who understood that childhood should be protected from adult nightmares for as long as possible. I'll send you coordinates. Marcus, this is my daughter we're talking about. Then she'll be safer than the president's nuclear codes. You have my word. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you're both still breathing. The line went dead, leaving Ethan staring at his phone and wondering when his life had become a series of calls to people who specialized in keeping other people alive in situations where death was the most likely outcome. Marcus Rodriguez, Diana asked, having overheard enough of the conversation to piece together the basics. You know him by reputation. Good man. Expensive but good. Diana's expression was thoughtful. He'll keep Maya safe. But what about us? We go to the party, Isabella said, her voice carrying the steel that had built her empire. We face Graves on our terms, in our territory, with our rules. It's not that simple, Ethan warned. Graves didn't get where he is by walking into situations he couldn't control. He'll have contingencies, backup plans, ways to turn our advantages against us. Then we'll have to be smarter than he is. He's not stupid, Isabella. Ruthless, yes, Amoral, absolutely, but not stupid. Neither am I. Isabella's smile held depths of steel and fire that made Ethan remember why she'd built one of the most successful corporations in the country before her 30th birthday. Lucas Graves wants to play power games fine, but he's about to learn that I didn't get where I am by losing. They walked back toward the house as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire that seemed ominously appropriate for the conversation they'd just had. Maya met them at the door, her face bright with excitement, and her hair decorated with what appeared to be daisy chains. Isabella, Mrs. Chen taught me how to make flower crowns. Look. She placed a circle of daisies and baby's breath on Isabella's head, with the solemn care of someone bestowing a royal crown. Now you're the queen of the swans. Isabella felt something warm and complicated bloom in her chest as she looked down at Maya's upturned face. The child's absolute trust and innocent joy felt like a sacred responsibility, a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Daddy, you need one too. Maya was already reaching for another flower crown, but Ethan gently caught her hands. Maybe later, sweetheart. Right now, Daddy needs to talk to you about something important. Maya's expression shifted her 8-year-old instincts, recognizing the particular tone adults used when they were about to say things that would change everything. Are we going on another adventure? Sort of. Remember Uncle Marcus, Mommy's friend from the army? The one who taught me how to tie knots. That's him. He's going to come visit, and you're going to go stay with him for a few days while Daddy takes care of some business. Maya's face fell. Can't I stay with you? Not this time, sweetheart, but it's going to be fun. Uncle Marcus has a cabin by a lake, and he knows all about camping and fishing and making s'mores over a real campfire. What about you and Isabella? Ethan knelt down so he was at Maya's eye level, his hands gentle on her small shoulders. We're going to take care of the bad men so they can't bother us anymore. And then we're all going to be together again. Promise. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow loaded with all the weight of promises made and promises broken of futures that might never come to pass, and children who deserved better than fathers who fought monsters for a living. I promise, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Maya studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read adult expressions for signs of lies or evasions. Whatever she saw, there must have satisfied her, because she nodded solemnly and wrapped her arms around his neck in a hug that smelled like sunshine and innocence and everything worth protecting in the world. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart, more than all the stars in the sky, and all the fish in the sea, and all the fish in the sea. It was their ritual, their private language of love that had started when Maya was barely old enough to speak, and had continued through bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the small moments that built the foundation of a father-daughter relationship. Isabella watched the exchange with something that felt suspiciously like tears burning behind her eyes. She'd built her life around quarterly reports and merger negotiations, had convinced herself that success meant climbing higher and accumulating more, that emotional attachments were weaknesses that compromised judgment and clouded decision-making. But watching Ethan with his daughter, seeing the pure love that passed between them like a visible current, she realized she'd been measuring success with the wrong metrics. Maya looked at her father like he hung the moon and stars personally, and Ethan looked at his daughter like she was his reason for breathing. Isabella, Maya's voice drew her back to the present. Are you okay? You look sad. I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about how lucky your daddy is to have you. He is pretty lucky, Maya agreed with 8-year-old confidence. But I'm lucky too. He's the best daddy in the whole world. Yes, he is. Their eyes met over Maya's head, and something passed between them, recognition of truths that couldn't be spoken aloud, but were understood nonetheless. Isabella was falling in love with a man who might not survive the next 48 hours, and that man was falling in love with a woman whose world was about to collide with his in ways that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd built. Marcus arrived 2 hours later, driving a nondescript sedan that probably contained enough firepower to outfit a small army. He was exactly as Ethan remembered, 6 feet of muscle and scars, wrapped in the kind of quiet competence that came from surviving situations where competence was the difference between going home and going to the morgue. Brother. Marcus embraced Ethan with the fierce affection of men who'd shared foxholes and trusted each other with their lives. You look good for a dead man. You look old for someone who's supposed to be retired. Retirement's boring. Besides, private security pays better than a government pension. Marcus's eyes found Maya, who was watching the reunion with curious interest. And this must be the famous Maya I've heard so much about. Are you really Uncle Marcus? Maya asked, with the directness that made adults squirm. I really am. And I hear you know how to tie a bowline knot. Maya's face lit up. Want to see more than anything? As Maya demonstrated her knot-tying skills with the focused intensity of someone presenting a doctoral thesis, Marcus and Ethan stepped aside for a conversation that required adult ears only. How bad is it? Marcus asked quietly. Bad enough that I'm calling in favors from retired Delta Force operators. Graves is smart, brother. Smart and connected and rich enough to buy small countries. You sure you want to poke this particular bear? The bear's already awake. Now I just need to make sure he doesn't eat my daughter while I'm killing him. Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who'd made similar calculations in darker places. I've got a place in Montana, completely off the grid, no electronic signatures, no paper trail. Maya will be safe there. For how long? As long as it takes. They shook hands with the solemnity of men who understood that some promises were sealed in blood rather than words. Maya hugged her father goodbye with the fierce intensity of someone who understood that some goodbyes carried more weight than others, then climbed into Marcus's sedan with the resilience that had carried her through her mother's death and her father's dangerous secrets. As the taillights disappeared into the darkness, Ethan felt a piece of his heart go with them. Maya was safe, safer than she'd been since this nightmare began, but safety came at the cost of separation, and separation felt like dying a little bit at a time. She'll be okay, Isabella said softly, her hand finding his in the darkness. I know, but knowing doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one in the clear country sky. Tomorrow night would bring violence and reckoning, blood and bullets, and the kind of choices that left scars on souls. But tonight, there was just silence and starlight, and the warm pressure of fingers intertwined in the darkness. Ethan, yeah, when this is over, when Graves is gone and Maya is safe and we don't have to look over our shoulders anymore. Isabella's voice carried the hesitant hope of someone asking for something she wasn't sure she deserved. What happens to us? It was the question that had been lurking beneath every conversation they'd had, every glance they'd shared, every moment when the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, and possibilities that felt too fragile to examine too closely. I don't know, he said honestly. 3 days ago, you were just the CEO who signed my paychecks. Now you're the woman I'd die to protect. The woman Maya asks about every morning. The woman who researches swan nutrition because an 8-year-old wants to feed the birds properly. Isabella felt her breath catch at the quiet intensity in his voice. And I think Sarah would have liked you. I think she would have wanted us to find each other. It was the closest thing to a declaration of love either of them had managed, wrapped in the careful language of people who'd learned that the future was never guaranteed, and promises were luxuries that soldiers and CEOs couldn't always afford. I think I would have liked her too, Isabella whispered. They kissed then, standing in the starlight, with the weight of tomorrow's violence pressing down on them like a physical thing. It was a kiss that tasted like hope and desperation and the particular sweetness of finding love in the midst of chaos. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, their hearts racing with something that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with the terrifying recognition that they'd found something worth fighting for. Whatever happens tomorrow, Isabella said, her forehead resting against his, I need you to know that these last few days, finding this, it's been worth everything. Isabella, no, let me say this, in case I don't get another chance. Her voice was steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. I've spent my whole life building walls protecting myself, convincing myself that being alone was the same as being strong. But you made me remember that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about standing together. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears that reflected starlight like diamonds. Then we stand together tomorrow. Whatever Graves throws at us, whatever games he wants to play, we face it together. Together, she agreed. They walked back to the house hand in hand, carrying with them the weight of words spoken and unspoken, of promises made and futures that hung in the balance. Tomorrow would bring Lucas Graves and whatever fresh hell he'd devised for them. But tonight they had each other and the quiet strength that came from finally admitting that some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth dying for. And some things, if you were very lucky and very careful and very, very good at staying alive, were worth living for too. The Metropolitan Hotel's grand ballroom blazed with the kind of orchestrated elegance that only unlimited budgets and careful planning could achieve. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across walls draped in midnight blue silk, while 500 of the city's most powerful people mingled beneath ceilings painted with angels who'd probably seen less sin than the average corporate merger. Ethan adjusted his bow tie for the third time, the unfamiliar formal wear feeling, like armor designed by someone who'd never been in an actual fight. He'd traded his janitor's uniform for a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people made in a month, but underneath the civilized veneer, every muscle was coiled for violence. You look nervous, Isabella murmured, as she appeared at his elbow, resplendent in a gown that managed to be both elegant and tactical, midnight blue silk that flowed like water but concealed the ceramic knife strapped to her thigh and the panic button disguised as a vintage brooch. I am nervous. Ethan's eyes swept the ballroom, cataloging exits and sightlines and the dozen places where a professional killer could set up shop. Graves is here somewhere, and I can't shake the feeling we're walking into something bigger than we planned for. The security sweep came up clean. Diana's people are in position. We have backup plans for our backup plans. And yet you've learned not to trust easy victories. Isabella's smile was understanding rather than reassuring. Welcome to my world. Paranoia is a survival skill when you're playing at this level. The Shaw Industries charity gala was supposed to be a celebration raising monies for children's hospitals while providing convenient cover for the kind of networking that built empires and toppled governments. But tonight, it felt more like a chess match being played with real bullets, where every smile hid a strategy and every handshake might be the last. "Mr. Cole." A voice behind them carried the particular accent that made Ethan's blood run cold. "How delightful to finally meet you properly." They turned to find Viktor Petrov approaching with the fluid grace of a predator who'd learned to dress like prey. He wore his tuxedo like a second skin, every inch the civilized European gentleman, except for the eyes that held depths better left unexplored. "Mr. Petrov?" Ethan's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone loading a weapon. "I was wondering when you'd make your appearance." Lucas insisted I introduce myself properly. Last evening's encounter was rather rushed. Victor's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Ms. Voss, you look absolutely radiant. That gown is exquisite." "Thank you." Isabella's tone could have frozen champagne. "Where's your employer?" "Making the rounds as any good guest should. He's quite looking forward to your conversation." Victor glanced around the ballroom with the professional assessment of someone who killed people for money. Magnificent venue. So many prominent citizens in one place. Rather vulnerable, don't you think? The threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took a moment to register. Ethan felt ice crystallize in his veins as the implications hit home. Graves wasn't just here for a private meeting. He was here to make a statement that would echo through every boardroom and government office in the country. "How many?" Ethan asked quietly. "I'm sorry. How many people are going to die tonight?" Victor's smile widened, revealing teeth that belonged on sharks. "That depends entirely on how cooperative you and Ms. Voss choose to be. Lucas is a reasonable man when he gets what he wants." "And what does he want? Why don't you ask him yourself?" Victor stepped aside with theatrical courtesy, and Ethan found himself face to face with the man who'd haunted his nightmares for 3 years. Lucas Graves looked exactly as he had the last time they'd met: sharp features, pale eyes, and the kind of smile that belonged in psychiatric textbooks under the heading, "Warning Signs of Psychopathy." He was smaller than Ethan remembered, almost delicate in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but size had never been Graves's weapon of choice. He killed with intelligence and money, and the particular kind of cruelty that came from viewing other human beings as expendable resources. "Ethan." Graves's voice carried warmth that somehow made his words more menacing rather than less. "You look well for a dead man." "Lucas." Ethan kept his hands visible and his stance relaxed, but every instinct was screaming warnings about proximity to apex predators, still collecting paychecks from terrorists and war criminals. "I've diversified my portfolio. Corporate consulting pays remarkably well, and the hours are much more civilized." Graves's gaze shifted to Isabella, and something hungry flickered in his pale eyes. "Ms. Voss, I must say your reputation for intelligence doesn't do you justice. You're absolutely stunning." "Mr. Graves," Isabella's voice could have cut glass. "I wish I could say the pleasure was mutual." "Oh, but it will be. Before the evening is over, I'm quite confident we'll find common ground." Graves gestured toward the ballroom's center, where couples were beginning to gather for the traditional charity auction. "Shall we find somewhere more private to discuss business?" "Here is fine," Ethan said flatly. "I'm afraid not. You see, our conversation requires certain visual aids that would be inappropriate for such elegant company." Graves's smile took on a predatory edge. "Besides, I think you'll find my presentation much more compelling when you understand the full scope of what's at stake." He nodded toward the ballroom's eastern wall, where a service door was barely visible behind elegant draping. 2 men in waiters' uniforms stood nearby, their posture suggesting they'd learned violence in the same schools Ethan had attended. "Lead the way." Isabella said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. They walked through the service door into a corridor that serviced the hotel's kitchens and storage areas, utilitarian concrete and fluorescent lighting that felt like stepping behind the curtain of an elaborate theatrical production. The waiters fell into step behind them, close enough to prevent escape, but far enough to avoid crossfire if things went sideways. The corridor opened into what had once been a private dining room, now converted into something that looked like a command center from a military thriller. Laptop computers displayed live feeds from security cameras throughout the hotel. Communications equipment filled one wall, and a large table held architectural plans that looked suspiciously like bombing schematics. "Impressive, isn't it?" Graves gestured around the room with obvious pride. 3 months of planning and preparation. Did you know the Metropolitan Hotel sits directly above the city's primary financial data hub? Fascinating piece of urban infrastructure. Ethan felt the bottom drop out of his world as understanding crashed over him like ice water. "You're not here for me." "Oh, but I am. You're an essential component of tonight's festivities." Graves moved to one of the computer terminals and brought up a live feed of the ballroom, where 500 people continued their elegant networking, completely unaware they were sitting on top of enough explosives to level a city block. "But you're also collateral damage." "What do you want?" Isabella demanded. "Justice." Graves's voice carried the particular conviction of zealots and serial killers. 3 years ago, your boyfriend cost me everything. My organization, my reputation, my freedom. Do you have any idea what federal prison is like for someone with my particular skill set?" "Not long enough, apparently," Ethan said. "Quite right. 18 months, thanks to some excellent legal representation and a few well-placed campaign contributions. But imprisonment gives one time to think, to plan, to consider how best to balance the scales." Graves brought up another screen showing structural diagrams of the financial data center. "The beauty of modern civilization is how interconnected everything has become. Destroy the right servers, eliminate the right people, and you can crash markets that span continents." Isabella felt her blood turn to ice as the scope of Graves's plan became clear. The charity gala isn't the target. It's cover. Precisely. While 500 of the city's elite are enjoying their champagne and self-congratulation, I'll be downloading terabytes of financial data from every major bank, investment firm, and government agency on the East Coast. By morning, I'll have enough insider information to manipulate markets worth trillions of dollars. And the explosives, insurance. If anyone attempts to interfere with the download, or if local authorities become overly enthusiastic about law enforcement, I simply press a button and remove several city blocks from existence. Graves's smile was radiantly insane. The authorities will be faced with an interesting choice: allow me to complete my work and escape, or sacrifice 500 innocent lives to stop me. Ethan's mind raced through tactical possibilities, each one leading to the same conclusion: Graves had built a perfect trap. Any attempt to stop him would trigger a massacre, but allowing him to succeed would give him the resources to become untouchable. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked. "You're going to help me, of course." Graves gestured to another monitor showing grainy surveillance footage of a mountain cabin surrounded by pristine wilderness. "Lovely place Marcus has there. Very remote. Perfect for a man who values his privacy." The screen switched to thermal imaging that showed 2 figures inside the cabin, one large, one small. Ethan felt his heart stop as he recognized the heat signatures of Marcus and Maya, safe in their Montana hideaway until this moment. "If you harm her, I won't have to. You're going to ensure my plan proceeds without interference, and in exchange your daughter will continue to enjoy her camping adventure until this is all over." Graves leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of a chess master announcing checkmate. Of course, if anything unfortunate should happen to me, my associates have very specific instructions regarding loose ends. Isabella watched Ethan's face go pale as understanding hit him like a physical blow. Graves hadn't just trapped them, he'd turned Maya into a weapon aimed at her father's heart, a guarantee of cooperation that no tactical training could overcome. "You bastard," she whispered. "I'm a businessman, Ms. Voss. I believe in insurance policies." Graves stood and moved to a wall of equipment that looked like it belonged in a NASA control center. "The download will take approximately 45 minutes. During that time, you'll both remain here as my guests, ensuring that no unfortunate misunderstandings occur. And after you'll walk back to the ballroom and continue enjoying the gala as if nothing happened. I'll disappear into the night with enough information to build a new empire, and everyone goes home happy." Graves's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Well, almost everyone." He pressed a button on one of the computers and the monitors flickered to life, showing live feeds from throughout the hotel. Kitchen staff went about their work, security guards walked their rounds, and in the ballroom, 500 people continued their elegant mingling, completely unaware that their lives hung in the balance. "The beauty of this plan," Graves continued, "is that even if you manage to escape, even if you somehow alert the authorities, they can't act without condemning everyone in that ballroom to death. I've created the perfect hostage situation, one where the hostages don't even know they're hostages." Ethan studied the room with professional eyes, cataloging weapons and escape routes, and the dozen different ways he could kill Graves before the man could trigger his dead man's switch. But every scenario led to the same conclusion. Maya would die in a cabin thousands of miles away, and 500 innocent people would follow her into darkness. "There has to be another way," Isabella said quietly. "I'm afraid not. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play at all." Graves settled into his chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd planned for every contingency. "But please make yourselves comfortable. This is going to take a while." The next 30 minutes passed like hours in a torture chamber designed by someone who understood that psychological pain could be worse than physical agony. Ethan watched the countdown timer on Graves's computer tick toward 0 while images of Maya played on loop in his mind. Her laugh, her smile, the way she looked at him, like he was the bravest man in the world. Isabella sat beside him in elegant silence, but he could feel the fury radiating from her like heat from a forge. She'd built her empire by refusing to accept defeat, by finding solutions where others saw only problems. But tonight, they were caught in a web that tightened with every passing second. "You know," Graves said conversationally, "I actually admire what you've built together. The partnership, the mutual respect, the way you complement each other's strengths. It's quite romantic, really." "Go to hell," Isabella replied without looking up. "Perhaps, but not tonight." Graves checked his watch with the casual precision of someone timing a soufflé. 23 minutes remaining. "I must say the download is proceeding faster than anticipated. Financial institutions have become remarkably efficient at digitizing their most sensitive information." Ethan felt something shift in his peripheral vision movement on one of the security monitors that didn't belong to hotel staff or party guests. A figure in black tactical gear was moving through the service corridors with the fluid precision of someone who'd learned violence in the same schools Ethan had attended. Diana. She appeared on multiple cameras as she made her way through the hotel's infrastructure, taking out Graves's security personnel with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon removing tumors. Each takedown was silent, professional, leaving unconscious bodies in her wake, rather than corpses that might trigger alarms. Graves was so focused on his computer screens that he missed the systematic dismantling of his operation happening 3 floors below. But Ethan saw it all and felt hope kindle in his chest like a flame that refused to be extinguished. 15 minutes, Graves announced. Soon we'll all be able to get back to our respective lives. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the room in hellish red light that turned faces into demon masks and shadows into potential threats. Graves spun toward his computer terminals, fingers flying over keyboards as he tried to determine what had gone wrong. Backup systems are functioning, he muttered. Download is still in progress. Must be a hotel malfunction. But Ethan knew better. Diana had cut the main power, which meant she'd reached the hotel's central systems and was now working her way upward through the building's nervous system like a virus designed to destroy electronic infrastructure. The room's main door exploded inward in a shower of smoke and splinters, and Diana rolled through the opening like a wraith made of Kevlar and fury. She came up shooting her weapon, tracking toward Graves with mechanical precision. "Don't move!" she commanded, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who killed people for a living. Graves smiled and held up a small device that looked like a garage door opener crossed with an apocalypse. "Ms. Ross, I presume your timing is impeccable, but perhaps not as clever as you think." "Dead man's switch," Ethan said quietly. "Let go of that button and everything goes boom." Along with 500 innocent people and one small girl in Montana, Graves's smile was radiantly insane. "So, perhaps we should all remain very calm while we discuss terms." Diana's weapon never wavered, but Ethan could see the calculation in her eyes, professional assessment of an impossible situation where every solution led to catastrophic casualties. "What do you want?" she asked. "Completion of my download safe passage out of the city and a 12-hour head start before anyone attempts to follow me." Graves glanced at his computer screens, where progress bars continued their inexorable march toward completion. 8 minutes remaining, surely a reasonable request under the circumstances. And if we refuse, then we all become part of a very large crater, and history will remember this as the night terrorism came home to America's financial capital. The standoff stretched like a wire under tension, 4 people frozen in a tableau of mutual destruction, while computers hummed their electronic lullabies and countdown timers marked the seconds until either salvation or apocalypse. Then Isabella stood up. "Lucas," she said quietly, her voice carrying the particular authority she'd developed in boardrooms where billion-dollar deals lived or died on the strength of a single decision. "You made one mistake in your perfect plan." "Did I? You assumed I was here as a victim." Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "But I didn't build a multi-billion-dollar corporation by being anyone's victim." She reached into her purse with movements slow enough to avoid triggering Diana's defensive instincts and withdrew what looked like a standard smartphone. But when she activated the screen, Ethan recognized the interface of a military-grade communications device. "You see, when someone threatens my company, my employees, and my family, I tend to take it personally." Isabella's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. "So I made a few calls while you were gloating about your brilliant plan." The room's remaining monitors flickered and went dark, then came back online showing different images, satellite feeds of the hotel from above, thermal imaging of the building's interior, and tactical displays that belonged to organizations with 3-letter acronyms and unlimited budgets. "What the hell?" Graves began. "FBI hostage rescue team is positioned on the roof," Isabella continued calmly. "ATF bomb disposal units are in the basement working on your little insurance policy. And NSA cyber warfare specialists have been tracing your download in real time, feeding you false data while they map your entire network." Graves's face went pale as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Impossible. My encryption is very good, but not quite good enough. Isabella's smile was predatory now. Did you really think I'd walk into this without backup plans? I learned paranoia from some very expensive consultants. The countdown timer on Graves's computer hit 0, but instead of completion, the screen displayed a message that made his blood turn to ice. Download terminated. Federal investigation in progress. Have a nice day. No. He whispered, his finger hovering over the dead man's switch. No, this isn't how it ends. Actually, Diana said, her weapon still trained on his center mass, it is. She squeezed the trigger twice, the suppressed gunshots, barely audible over the hum of electronic equipment. The bullets took Graves in the shoulder and wrist, precisely placed shots that severed tendons and shattered bone without touching anything vital. The dead man's switch tumbled from nerveless fingers, clattering across the floor like a dice roll that determined the fate of nations. Ethan lunged forward and caught the device before it could hit the ground, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through his system like liquid electricity. For a moment that lasted forever, he held the power of life and death in his palm, 500 lives, and his daughter's future balanced on the edge of a button no bigger than a wedding ring. Then Diana was beside him, her fingers working over the device with the practiced skill of someone who'd disarmed more exotic explosives in more exotic locations than most people could imagine. "Dummy switch," she announced after a moment that felt like eternity. Graves was bluffing. What? No radio transmitter, no backup trigger, no connection to anything explosive. Diana held up the device, revealing circuitry that looked impressive, but was essentially a very expensive paperweight. He was counting on psychological pressure to keep us compliant. Isabella felt her knees go weak with relief so profound it felt like dying and being reborn in the same instant. "Maya is fine," Diana confirmed. "Marcus checked in 20 minutes ago. They're roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories around a campfire." Graves lay crumpled against the wall, clutching his wounded shoulder and staring at them with the particular hatred of someone whose perfect plan had dissolved into complete and utter failure. "This isn't over," he snarled through gritted teeth. "You think this ends anything? I have people, resources, connections you can't imagine." "Had," Isabella corrected gently. "Past tense. Because while you were planning your elaborate revenge fantasy, I was buying up your debts, foreclosing on your properties, and convincing your former associates that cooperation with federal authorities was in their best financial interests." "Impossible. Lucas, you tried to destroy my company and threaten my family. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back with every resource at my disposal?" Isabella knelt down so she was at his eye level, her voice carrying the particular steel that had built her empire. "By morning, you'll be completely broke, completely alone, and completely forgotten. The only choice you'll have left is which federal prison you'd prefer for your next 20 to life sentence." Ethan watched the exchange with something that might have been admiration, or might have been love, or might have been both. Isabella had faced down a terrorist armed with enough explosives to level a city block, and she'd done it with nothing more than superior planning and the particular kind of courage that came from protecting people you loved. "It's over," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's over," Isabella agreed. They walked back to the ballroom, hand in hand, leaving Diana to coordinate with the federal agents who were already swarming through the hotel like antibodies attacking an infection. The party continued around them in blissful ignorance, 500 people who would never know how close they'd come to becoming footnotes in a madman's revenge fantasy. "Ladies and gentlemen, The evening's host announced from the stage. If I could have your attention for just a moment. It's time for our final auction item of the evening, a private dinner for two at Le Bernardin, generously donated by our hosts this evening, Shaw Industries. Isabella squeezed Ethan's hand as polite applause filled the ballroom. What do you say? Want to make a bid? I think I've already won everything that matters, he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. 3 days later, Ethan stood in a cemetery where granite angels watched over dreams that had ended too soon, and love that refused to die, even when the heart that held it had stopped beating. Sarah's headstone was simple, her name, her dates, and the words, beloved wife and mother, carved in letters that looked too small to contain the magnitude of what she'd meant to him. Hey, beautiful, he said quietly, kneeling to place fresh daisies beside the stone. I brought someone I'd like you to meet. Isabella stood a few feet away, giving him space for a conversation that belonged to the living and the dead in equal measure. She'd changed from her business suit into jeans and a sweater, looking younger and somehow more real than the corporate goddess who commanded boardrooms and merger negotiations. Sarah, this is Isabella. She's become very important to Maya and me. Ethan's voice carried the weight of words that had taken 3 years to find. I think you'd like her. She's brilliant and strong, and she makes Maya laugh. She researches swan nutrition and throws tea parties for stuffed animals, and she faced down a terrorist because she was worried about our family. The spring breeze stirred the trees overhead, rustling leaves in patterns that might have been random, or might have been Sarah's way of saying she approved of the woman who'd brought light back into her husband's darkness. I love her. Ethan continued the words, feeling both natural and revolutionary. I'll always love you. You'll always be Maya's mother and my first everything. But Isabella, she's my second chance, and I think you'd want me to take it. He stood and walked back to Isabella, who was watching him with eyes that held understanding rather than jealousy. Some love stories ended with death, but others began with the courage to love again, despite the possibility of loss. How do you feel? She asked. Free, he said, and realized it was true. For the first time in 3 years, I feel free. They drove back to the estate in comfortable silence, both of them lost in thoughts of futures that stretched ahead like unmarked roads leading to horizons they couldn't yet see. Maya would be home tomorrow, full of stories about camping adventures and s'mores recipes, ready to resume the business of being 8 years old in a world that had become slightly safer, because 3 adults had been willing to stand between her and the monsters. Ethan, Isabella's voice carried the particular hesitation of someone asking for something they weren't sure they deserved. Yeah. When Maya gets home tomorrow, when all of this is really over and we can stop looking over our shoulders. She paused, gathering courage that came easier in boardrooms than in matters of the heart. Would you and Maya like to move in with me officially, I mean? Not as my head of security or because of some corporate arrangement. As a family. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Family. Such a simple concept, but one that carried the weight of Christmas mornings and bedtime stories and all the small moments that built lives worth living. I'd have to ask Maya, Ethan said, his smile taking any sting out of the delay. But I think she'd say yes. She's been planning our wedding since the day she met you. Our wedding. She's very thorough in her planning. Apparently it's going to involve swans and flower crowns and a cake shaped like a castle. Isabella felt tears threaten to spill over as she imagined walking down an aisle toward the man who'd saved her life and the little girl who'd stolen her heart. That sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? They pulled into the estate's driveway as the sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of promise and possibility. Tomorrow would bring Maya home and the beginning of whatever came next, school plays, and parent-teacher conferences, and all the beautiful mundane moments that made up a life lived in the light instead of the shadows. But tonight, there was just the two of them, and the quiet certainty that some stories, if you were very lucky and very brave and very willing to fight for what mattered, ended not with loss, but with love multiplied and shared and made stronger by having been tested in the fires of adversity. Ethan Cole had been many things: soldier, ghost, janitor, protector. But as he walked toward the house with Isabella's hand in his, he realized he was about to become something he'd never expected to be again. A man who believed in happy endings. And perhaps most importantly of all, a man who was brave enough to reach out and claim one when it was offered. 6 months later, Maya Cole, soon to be Maya Cole Voss, stood at the altar of a small chapel overlooking the same lake where she'd first fed swans with the woman who was about to become her new mother. Her dress was white silk with flower embroidery, and her hair was crowned with daisies that matched the ones she carried in a basket that seemed almost too big for her small hands. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Ethan asked, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, but somehow more real than he'd ever looked in either janitor's coveralls or tactical gear. "I've been ready forever, Daddy," Maya replied with 8-year-old confidence. "Isabella's been part of our family since the first day. Now it's just going to be official." The chapel doors opened, and Isabella appeared in a gown that managed to be both elegant and playful ivory silk, with touches of blue that matched her eyes and Maya's flower crown. She walked down the aisle not to traditional wedding music, but to a song Maya had chosen, something about love multiplying when it's shared rather than divided. When she reached the altar, Isabella knelt down to Maya's level for a conversation that belonged to just the two of them. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? Once I marry your daddy, you're stuck with me forever." "Promise?" Maya asked, her gray eyes, so like her father's, holding depths of hope and trust that made Isabella's breath catch. "I promise." "Good. Because I picked you to be my new mom and I never change my mind about important things." They hugged, then two souls finding family in the space between heartbeats, while Ethan watched with eyes that held more happiness than he'd ever thought possible. The ceremony itself was small and perfect. Marcus giving Isabella away because her own father had never been the kind of man who deserved the honor. Mrs. Chen crying happy tears in the front row, Diana serving as maid of honor with her usual professional competence applied to flower arrangements and photo coordination. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Maya stood up with the gravity of someone making an important announcement. "I object," she declared, and the entire chapel held its breath until she continued, "To anyone who thinks this isn't the best wedding in the history of the world." Laughter rippled through the small gathering like warm rain, and Isabella felt her heart overflow with love for the little girl who'd decided she needed a mother, and the man who'd decided he was brave enough to love again. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced, and Ethan did softly, sweetly, with the reverence of someone who understood that some miracles came disguised as second chances. As they walked back down the aisle as a family, Maya tossing flower petals with the focused intensity of someone performing a sacred ritual, Isabella caught sight of a granite angel in the cemetery, visible through the chapel's stained glass windows. Sarah's grave was too far away to see clearly, but Isabella could have sworn she saw a figure standing beside the headstone, a woman in flowing white, who raised her hand in what might have been a blessing, or might have been a simple goodbye. When Isabella blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only sunlight, and the certainty that love once given freely never truly died, but instead transformed into something larger and more beautiful than any one heart could hold alone. They drove away from the chapel in Isabella's Aston Martin, now decorated with tin cans and ribbons, courtesy of Maya's careful planning, heading toward a honeymoon that would include camping trips and board game tournaments, and all the beautiful chaos that came with building a family from love and trust, and the courage to believe in happy endings. In the rearview mirror, the chapel grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a memory painted in sunlight and promise. But ahead of them stretched highways that led to everywhere and nowhere, and all the places in between where families made memories and love grew stronger with each passing day. Maya fell asleep in the back seat, somewhere outside the city limits, her flower crown slightly askew, and her small hands still clutching the handle of her flower basket. Isabella reached back to adjust the blanket around her new daughter's shoulders, then settled back into her seat, with the contented sigh of someone who'd found everything she'd never known she was looking for. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked quietly. "Just one," Isabella replied, taking his free hand and intertwining their fingers. "I wish we'd found each other sooner. Maybe we found each other exactly when we were supposed to. Maybe we did." They drove on through the afternoon sunshine, three people who'd found family in the space between violence and peace, between loss and hope, between the fear of loving and the courage to love anyway. Behind them, the city fell away like a discarded skin, carrying with it janitors' uniforms and parking garage confrontations and all the shadows they'd left behind in favor of light. Ahead of them lay everything else: birthday parties and bedtime stories, Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday afternoons, all the beautiful ordinary moments that made up lives lived fully, and love shared freely, and futures built on the foundation of believing that some stories, if you fought hard enough for them, really could have happy endings. And in the space between what was and what could be, between the past that had shaped them and the future they were building together, three hearts beat in rhythm with the simple truth that had guided them home: love, when it's real and tested and proven strong enough to survive anything the world can throw at it, doesn't just conquer all. It transforms everything it touches into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined possible. Even janitors, even CEOs, even little girls who feed swans and plan weddings and understand that families are built not just by blood, but by choice and courage and the willingness to open your heart to possibilities you never saw coming. The end.